My name's Liza. I'm 29 now, but when I was just 18, my life flipped overnight. My stepmom and my brother did something I never thought family could do. They took everything my dad left me. Every single dollar. I didn't even realize how deep their betrayal went. Not until years later, when I finally made them regret it in a way they never saw coming. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment and subscribe for more stories about family, betrayal, and finding strength. I still remember the sound of my phone that morning. It was a Saturday, a quiet one. The kind where the sun comes through your curtains just right, and the air feels calm like nothing bad could possibly happen. I was making pancakes for my dad and me, humming to a country song playing low on the radio. Then the phone rang. At first, I thought it was one of Dad's work friends, maybe calling about a weekend barbecue. But the voice on the other end wasn't friendly. It was tight, nervous, and trying to sound calm. Is this Liza Matthews? Yes, who's calling? This is Officer Grant from the County Sheriff's Department. I'm afraid there's been an accident. That word accident hit me like a punch. I could feel my hands go cold. Dad had been driving to pick up some car parts from a shop across town. He loved tinkering with engines, always fixing up old Chevys on weekends. But that morning a truck had run a red light. They said he didn't suffer long. I remember staring at the wall, hearing the officer's voice fade out like background noise. Everything after that blurred together. The drive to the hospital, the quiet hallway, the smell of antiseptic, the nurse's face when she shook her head. I didn't cry right away. I just felt hollow. A funeral that didn't feel real. Dad's funeral was small. Just family and a few neighbors. People came up and said the usual things. He was such a good man. He'll be missed. Stay strong, sweetheart. But I barely heard them. What stood out most wasn't the grief. It was how calm my stepmom, Carla, looked. She wasn't crying like I was. Her eyes were dry, her makeup perfect, her voice smooth as she greeted everyone like a host at a dinner party. My stepbrother Dylan stood beside her, hands in his pockets, scrolling on his phone half the time. Dad had married Carla 3 years earlier. She was nice enough at first, polished, polite, always dressed well. But I could never shake the feeling she didn't really like me. She was the kind of woman who smiled with her lips but never with her eyes. After the service, Carla placed a soft hand on my shoulder. Don't you worry about anything, honey. I'll handle all the paperwork and the insurance stuff. Your dad made sure we were taken care of. I nodded, trusting her. Why wouldn't I? She was my dad's wife. Family. Promises over paperwork. A few days later, we sat in the lawyer's office. The smell of old coffee and printer ink hung in the air. Carla sat beside me, pretending to be somber while flipping through documents faster than I could read. The lawyer explained about the life insurance policy Dad had taken out, a pretty good one, and how it would go to the family account for expenses and my future college fund. Your stepmom will be the trustee until you're 21, he said kindly. She'll make sure the funds are used for your benefit. I remember smiling a little through the numbness. Dad had always believed in me. He used to say, "You're gonna go to college, Liza. I'll make sure of it." When Carla signed the papers, I didn't notice the small things. Her insistence on using her mailing address for all correspondence, her quiet control of every account detail. I just thought she was being responsible. That night, she came into my room, sat on the edge of my bed, and told me softly, "Your dad's wish was for you to focus on school, not money. I'll handle everything else. You just take care of yourself." Her voice was warm, comforting, but there was something rehearsed about it, something that didn't feel entirely sincere. A brother who changed overnight. Dylan was 19, just a year older than me. Before Dad died, we got along fine. Shared snacks, watched dumb movies, even helped each other with homework. But almost immediately after the funeral, he changed. He stopped talking much. When he did, his tone carried a quiet arrogance, like he suddenly had control over something I didn't. He teased me about being too emotional, or always asking questions. 2 weeks later, he showed up in the driveway with a used Mustang. Bright red, freshly waxed. "Got a deal through a friend," he said with a smirk. "You got a job?" I asked, half smiling. "Sort of. Don't worry about it." But I did worry. Dad hadn't even been gone a month, and here was Dylan with new clothes, new shoes, and a new car. Meanwhile, I was budgeting my lunch money and trying to keep my grades up. One evening, I passed by Carla's room and heard laughter, hers and Dylan's. They were talking about splitting something and keeping things quiet. The words didn't make sense then, but they stayed with me. The moment doubt began. The turning point came one rainy evening. I was in the living room, flipping through college brochures, and decided to finally ask Carla when we'd be starting the tuition paperwork. She smiled, not looking up from her tablet. "Oh, don't rush things, sweetheart. These things take time. The check hasn't fully cleared yet." Something about the way she said it made me pause. It had been nearly 2 months since Dad's death. Shouldn't the insurance have processed by now? "Can I see the papers?" I asked carefully. "What papers?" "You know, the insurance documents. The ones the lawyer mentioned." Her smile tightened. "Liza, you're still grieving. You don't need to stress about money. Trust me, okay?" Trust her. That's what she always said. But a few days later, when I was helping her clean out Dad's study, I noticed a folder missing from his desk, the one labeled Insurance and Policy Info. I didn't say anything. I just stared at the empty space where it used to sit. That night, while washing dishes, I overheard her on the phone again. Her tone was sharp, businesslike. "Yes, I closed it already. No, he has no idea. He's too young to question anything." I froze, the sponge slipping from my hand. My heart started pounding. She said he, not she. She was talking about Dylan. Click then, the car, the new clothes, the distance. I realized they'd taken something that wasn't theirs. A silence that spoke volumes. For the next few days, I didn't say a word. I watched. I listened. Every morning, Carla left the house with her phone glued to her ear. Every night, Dylan came home later, always smelling faintly of gas station cologne and cigarette smoke. I started keeping a small notebook, writing dates, receipts, anything that felt off. I didn't know why, but it made me feel like I was doing something. One morning, a letter arrived from the insurance company. Carla grabbed it from the mailbox before I could touch it. Later that day, I found it in the trash, ripped in half, edges smudged with coffee. All I could read were fragments. Claim processed, full payout, and beneficiary confirmed. My stomach twisted. That evening, when she called me down for dinner, I couldn't eat. The smell of her roasted chicken made me sick. I stared at her across the table, wondering how she could sit there smiling while pretending everything was fine. "You okay, Liza?" she asked sweetly. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Just not hungry." Her smile flickered just for a second, like she knew I was starting to see through her. When the house no longer felt like home. A week later, I came home from school to find my bedroom half empty. My boxes were stacked by the door. Carla was waiting in the hallway, arms crossed. "I think it's time you spent some time with your aunt in Ohio," she said smoothly. "You need a change of scenery." "We all do." I could barely speak. "You're kicking me out?" "Don't say it like that. You'll be better off there, trust me." There it was again, trust me. That night I sat on my bed, surrounded by silence. The walls felt closer than ever. Every picture, every memory of my dad suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. I didn't cry that night. I just promised myself one thing: someday I'd find out exactly what they did. And when I did, I'd make sure they never forgot it. The night I left home felt quieter than it should have. No yelling. No slammed doors. Just that strange, heavy kind of silence that feels permanent, the kind that sinks into your skin. Carla didn't even come downstairs when I rolled my suitcase out. She just called from the top of the stairs, "Be good, Liza." I didn't answer. My aunt's house in Ohio was small, filled with the smell of lavender candles and old furniture. She was kind but practical, one of those women who didn't talk about feelings much. When I arrived, she simply said, "You can stay as long as you need, but don't expect the world to wait for you." So I didn't. For the next few weeks, I tried to move forward. I worked part-time at a grocery store, finished school, and tried not to think about the house I grew up in, or the people still living there. But that's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't fade. It lingers quietly like a bruise under your skin. Dreams that died quietly. Spring rolled around faster than I realized, and with it came the one thing that used to excite me most: college application season. I'd always dreamed of going to Ohio State. My dad and I used to talk about it all the time. He'd say, "You'll be the first Matthews to walk across that stage, sweetheart." So when I got the acceptance letter, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. Felt like maybe, just maybe, I could still make him proud. But when the tuition payment deadline came, I called Carla. My hands were shaking the whole time. Hey, I started trying to sound polite. I got accepted. I'll need the funds from Dad's insurance for tuition. The college set payments due soon. Oh, honey, she said smoothly, like we were talking about the weather. About that, there's been a delay. Some paperwork issues. You know how slow banks are. It's been months, I said, my voice trembling. Shouldn't it be done by now? Don't worry so much, Liza. These things take time. I'll handle it. Something about the way she said handle it made my stomach twist. I hung up feeling uneasy, but still clinging to a thread of trust. Maybe she really was still waiting on the bank. Maybe things weren't as bad as I feared. Weeks went by. No update. Every time I called, she had a new excuse. Still processing. Wrong signature. Waiting for approval. It all sounded too polished, too rehearsed. The deadline passed. I missed the semester. And just like that, my dream slipped away quietly without a fight. The lie that hurt most. It was a hot June evening when the truth finally broke through the lies. I called Carla again, desperate, frustrated, ready to cry. Carla, please, I said. I just need to know what's going on. The school's been patient, but I can't keep waiting. Liza, she sighed. You're not listening. The insurance money wasn't what we expected. After paying off your dad's medical bills and the funeral, there wasn't much left. What? That can't be right, I said, my voice rising. Dad had full coverage, $250,000. He told me. He might have been mistaken, she said quickly. You were young. Maybe you misheard him. That's when I realized it wasn't confusion. It was control. She wasn't protecting me. She was keeping me quiet. I want to see the documents, I said firmly. There's nothing to see, sweetheart, she replied, her tone soft but cold. Let it go. Dwelling on money won't bring your father back. That line cut deeper than anything else she'd ever said. It wasn't just dismissive, it was cruel. After the call, I sat on my aunt's porch, watching the sunset fade behind the trees. Fireflies flickered in the tall grass, and somewhere down the road a dog barked. Everything looked peaceful, but I felt like the world was spinning out from under me. That night I cried for the first time in months, not just for the money but for the loss of trust, of family, of everything I thought was safe. Discovering Dylan's new life. A few days later I made the mistake of checking social media. Dylan's profile popped up, private before but now wide open, maybe by accident. The first thing I saw was a picture of him leaning on a brand new pickup truck. Captioned, "Work hard, play harder." The comments were full of friends congratulating him, saying how lucky he was. Scrolling further I saw more, pictures of weekend trips, new clothes, even a post about moving into his first apartment. Every photo screamed money. I felt sick. My dad's money. My college money. I saved the pictures one by one like evidence, not because I planned to use them yet, but because I needed to see the truth laid bare. When I showed my aunt, she frowned. That's not normal for a kid his age, not without help, she said. Are you sure your stepmom hasn't used your share? I'm sure, I whispered. I just don't know how to prove it. My aunt wasn't one for drama, but she looked angry. You can't do much right now, she said gently. But you can remember. Keep records. People like that, they slip up eventually. I nodded, even though it felt useless. At 18 I had no money, no lawyer, and no power. But I had something else, memory. And that would have to be enough for now. Confrontation that backfired. By midsummer I couldn't hold it in anymore. I called Carla again one last time, determined to confront her face to face. I'm coming by this weekend, I said. We need to talk about Dad's policy. I'm not asking anymore. Liza, she said with a small laugh, there's nothing to talk about. Don't drive all the way here for nothing. I'll be there, I said firmly. I borrowed my aunt's car and drove 3 hours straight back to the town I tried to forget. Every mile felt heavier. When I pulled up to the house, the lawn was freshly mowed, the flower beds trimmed. It didn't look like the home of someone struggling with bills. Carla opened the door before I even knocked. Her smile was painted on. Well, look who's here, she said. Didn't think you'd come back so soon. Inside, everything looked newer: new couch, new TV, new curtains. Dylan wasn't home. Maybe that was for the best. I just want to see the insurance paperwork, I said quietly. You're still on that? She sighed. Liza, I told you it's gone. All of it. I don't believe you, I said. Her eyes narrowed. Be careful with your tone. I've done nothing but take care of you since your father passed. You kicked me out. I gave you a chance to grow up. Something in me snapped then. You stole from me, Carla. From him. For a moment her face changed, not guilt, just annoyance. Watch your mouth. You don't know what you're talking about. I wanted to scream, to throw something to make her admit it. But instead I stood there shaking, realizing that no amount of truth would move her. Before I left, she added quietly, if you keep making trouble, you'll only make things worse for yourself. You have nothing, Liza. Remember that. She wasn't threatening me. She was reminding me of my powerlessness. And that hurt more than anything else. Leaving without closure. I drove away that night with tears in my eyes, the house shrinking in my rearview mirror. I didn't know what worse meant, but I didn't care. I was done begging for honesty from people who didn't value it. I went back to my aunt's place and decided to move on. I took extra shifts at the store, saved up for community college, and tried to rebuild my life. But sometimes late at night, when the world was quiet, I'd replay Carla's words in my head. You have nothing. She was wrong, though. I had something she didn't, the truth. It didn't pay bills or open doors, but it kept me grounded. One weekend, my aunt asked if I wanted to sell some of my dad's old tools that I'd brought along. We set them out at a yard sale, and while I was arranging boxes, an older man stopped by. He looked at one of the toolboxes and said, I knew your father. Worked with him at the garage. He mentioned setting up a college fund for you once. Said he wanted to make sure you'd never have to worry. My heart clenched. Did he say how much? I asked. The man smiled sadly. Enough to take care of you, that's for sure. He was proud of you. That small conversation lit something inside me. Not anger, not quite. Something steadier. A quiet determination that maybe someday, I'd find a way to make things right. For now, though, I kept working. I got into a local college eventually. Not the one I dreamed of, but it was mine. I paid my tuition bit by bit, sometimes skipping meals to make deadlines. But each time I handed over a check, I thought of my dad and whispered a silent promise. I'll make you proud, even without their help. Years later, that promise would come full circle, but back then I didn't know it yet. I just knew that trust, once broken, doesn't heal easy. And that money, when stolen, doesn't just take away dreams, it takes away peace. Still, I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The years that followed weren't glamorous. They were quiet, steady, and sometimes painfully lonely. But they were mine. I worked mornings at a diner and took evening classes at the local college. My days blurred into a rhythm. Wake up before sunrise, pour coffee for strangers, listen to their small talk, then rush to class with aching feet and ink-stained hands. It wasn't the life I dreamed of, but it was honest. Every paycheck felt like a small victory. Every past exam a quiet rebellion. For a while I stopped thinking about Carla and Dylan. I told myself that forgetting them was its own kind of peace, that I didn't need closure to move forward. But even silence has a way of echoing. There were moments when their absence felt louder than their presence ever did. Sometimes I'd glance at my phone, half expecting a text that never came. A birthday message, a check-in, anything. But the screen stayed blank. Year after year. They didn't just take my father's money. They took my place in their world and replaced it with silence. Small wins and heavy nights. When I turned 21, I was still living in the same small apartment above a bakery. The scent of bread drifted through my window every morning. A smell that reminded me that life, no matter how uncertain, keeps rising. That year, I got promoted to assistant manager at the diner. My coworkers threw me a little celebration, store-bought cupcakes, a card signed with quick, messy handwriting. It wasn't much, but it meant everything. Later that night, when everyone had gone home, I sat by my window with a cupcake and a single candle. I whispered, I made it another year, Dad. The flame flickered like it heard me. Still, there were nights that dragged. Nights where the loneliness settled deep in my bones. I'd scroll through social media and see Dylan living what looked like the perfect life. Parties, vacations, smiling next to Carla like they were the perfect little family. It didn't hurt the same way anymore. But it still burned, like an old scar you thought had faded until you brushed against it. The job that changed my direction. It was around that time I applied for a position at a local accounting firm. They needed an assistant who understood numbers and paperwork. I wasn't qualified on paper, but I had something better: determination. The interview was intimidating. The office was sleek, all glass walls and polished floors. The manager, Mr. Landon, looked like someone who didn't have time for uncertainty. "You've worked mostly in service jobs?" he asked, flipping through my resume. "Yes," I said, trying to steady my voice. "But I've handled transactions, inventory, and scheduling. Numbers don't scare me. People do sometimes." He smiled faintly, the first sign of softness in the whole building. "We'll see how you do," he said. I got the job. The first few weeks were rough, long hours, steep learning curve, but I loved it. Handling finances gave me a strange sense of control, like I could finally make sense of things that once felt chaotic. And somewhere between balance sheets and tax reports, I started to rebuild something I thought I'd lost: confidence. The letter that wasn't meant for me. One Friday afternoon, while organizing client files, I came across a familiar name: Carla Matthews. For a moment my hands froze. My stomach flipped. It wasn't the same Carla, I told myself. But then I saw the address: my old hometown. Same street. Same house. She had used my father's last name again. The file was routine, just a record of property taxes, a recent vehicle purchase, and some trust fund documents. I knew it wasn't my place to read deeper, but my heart was racing too fast to think clearly. I skimmed the pages, and there it was, a mention of a fund named the Matthews Family Reserve, established from an insurance claim nearly 7 years ago. 7 years. It was the money. My money. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. I closed the folder quickly before anyone saw, my hands shaking so hard I could barely slide it back into the cabinet. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes I saw my dad's face, his trust, his warmth, and then Carla's voice, dismissive and cold, saying, "It's gone." It wasn't gone. It was sitting in her account, renamed and hidden. Temptation to act. For days I debated what to do. Legally I couldn't access that information. I wasn't supposed to even know it. But how do you ignore the truth when it's staring you in the face? Part of me wanted to confront her again, to march right up to that house and throw the papers at her doorstep. But another part of me, the quieter, steadier one, said no. I'd been powerless before. Not anymore. So I did something else. I started learning. I spent my evenings studying financial law, property transfers, insurance claims. I read every case I could find about misused funds and family fraud. I wasn't just chasing revenge, I was preparing. Still, the emotional weight was heavy. Some nights I'd lie awake wondering why I still cared. Why couldn't I just let go? Then I'd remember my dad's promise, that he'd make sure I was taken care of. And the anger would return, not as rage but as fuel. A life half built. Years went by like that. I moved apartments, changed jobs twice, earned a promotion, and built a name for myself in finance. On the outside I was thriving, independent, focused, reliable. But inside there was still that hollow place. That part of me that wondered what life could have been if they hadn't taken what was mine. Sometimes I'd see a mother and daughter at a cafe, laughing over coffee, and feel a quiet ache. I never envied them, just missed the version of love I once thought I had. On holidays I'd send my aunt flowers with a small note. "Thank you for giving me a place to start." She'd always text back a single heart emoji. That was her version of, "I'm proud of you." I never heard from Carla or Dylan. Not once. No apologies. No attempts to reconnect. It was like I'd been erased. A ghost from a chapter they didn't want to remember. And yet, they still lived in the same house my father paid for. With the same money he left behind. A chance encounter. It was an ordinary afternoon, one of those gray, drizzly days when everyone just wants to go home early. I was grabbing coffee on my lunch break when I heard a familiar laugh behind me. I turned and froze. Dylan. He was standing in line talking loudly to someone on the phone, wearing an expensive watch and a tailored coat. He looked older, sure, but confident, maybe too confident. For a second I considered walking away. Pretend I didn't see him. But something inside me whispered, no, not this time. I waited until he finished his call, then said quietly, "Dylan." He turned startled, then smiled that same careless grin I used to know. "Liza? Wow. It's been years." "It has," I said. "You look successful." "Yeah, business has been good," he said. "Carla and I started something small a while back, property management. You know, Dad always said real estate was smart money." I almost laughed. Dad said that. The same man whose money they'd stolen. "That's great," I said evenly. "I'm glad things worked out for you." "Yeah," he said, glancing at his watch. "We got lucky, I guess." Lucky. He didn't even flinch saying it. When he left, I stood there for a while, clutching my cup so tightly it bent in my hand. My heart wasn't racing this time, though. It was calm. Too calm. Because I realized something important. They had moved on, pretending I didn't exist. But I hadn't been forgotten. I'd been underestimated. The turning point. That night, I went home and pulled out the folder I'd quietly kept for years. Old photos, messages, legal notes, screenshots of Dylan's posts, copies of Carla's records. It wasn't obsession anymore. It was clarity. I laid everything out on the table, the evidence of years of deceit, denial, and silence. The pieces of a puzzle I had once been too young and too scared to put together. And as I looked at it all, I felt a calm determination settle in. I wasn't that scared girl anymore. The one begging for truth. I was an adult, educated, steady, and finally strong enough to hold my ground. They had forgotten me because they thought they could. Because silence made me invisible. But they were wrong. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or quick. It's quiet. It's patient. It's the kind that grows roots while no one's looking. And though I didn't yet know how, I made myself a promise that night. I would take back what was mine. Not just the money but my dignity. My voice. My father's legacy. Until then, I'd keep building my life brick by brick. Because the best foundation is the one built by your own hands, the kind no one can steal. The night I made that promise to myself, something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage anymore, it was focus. For the first time in years, I wasn't running from the past. I was walking straight toward it. I started with the one place that held answers, the insurance company I now worked for. Not because I wanted to break any laws or do something reckless, but because I finally had the knowledge, access, and composure I'd once lacked. I wasn't the scared girl they could talk down anymore. A familiar name on the screen. It was a Wednesday, quiet, rainy, the kind of day where most people worked slowly, waiting for the clock to hit 5. I stayed late that evening like I often did. There was something peaceful about being the last one in the office. The hum of the computers, the low buzz of the air conditioner, the faint smell of printer ink. I was finishing up an audit report when an old file number flashed across my screen. My eyes scanned it absent-mindedly until I caught the name, Carla Matthews. My stomach tightened. It wasn't uncommon to see familiar names, but something about this one made the air around me feel heavy. My hand hovered over the mouse. I could close it and go home. Pretend it was a coincidence. But I didn't. The file opened with a soft click. Lines of data filled the screen, claim dates, payout histories, policy signatures. And there it was, policyholder Thomas Matthews. Beneficiary Carla Matthews. Dad's name. His handwriting. His trust. For a second my heart felt like it stopped. I blinked, trying to steady my breathing. I had prepared myself for this, but nothing could have truly prepared me to see his name again in black and white. Then my eyes caught something else. A second beneficiary added 6 months after Dad's death. Dylan Matthews. That was impossible. The system showed a digital signature from Carla and a notary stamp, but no document trail of consent from my father. The payout had been divided between her and Dylan's new trust fund. I sat there frozen. The office was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock. I whispered under my breath. "You really did it, didn't you?" The unraveling. I spent the next hour combing through archived documents. Each line a piece of a story I didn't want to believe but couldn't ignore. The dates didn't line up. The transaction approvals were rushed. Some forms were digitally altered. Others manually edited. I found one that broke me completely. A letter marked closed account notice under my name, claiming I had declined my beneficiary portion. My name. My father's money. A false signature. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a sting behind my eyes. My hands were trembling, but I wasn't angry the way I used to be. It was a deeper kind of pain, like watching someone you once trusted burn the bridge you built together, plank by plank. I saved a copy of the file to my work folder, encrypting it behind a password only I knew. I didn't know exactly what I would do yet, but for the first time in years I had proof. The whispered confession. The next day I decided to test something. I brought up the name casually during lunch with a senior coworker, Jason, who had been with the company for nearly 2 decades. He was calm, detail-oriented, and smart, the kind of person who noticed everything. "Hey Jason," I said lightly, stirring my coffee. "Do you remember any weird cases involving a Matthews claim? It's old, like 8-9 years back." He raised an eyebrow. "Matthews, Carla Matthews? Yeah, that name rings a bell." My pulse quickened. "Really?" He nodded slowly. "There was something odd about that one. I didn't handle it directly, but there was chatter about how quickly it got approved. Usually a policy that size takes months, not days. Someone higher up must have pushed it through." "Higher up?" I asked. "Could have been management," he shrugged. "Back then oversight was looser. Some agents cut corners." He said it so casually, but the words landed like stones. After lunch I returned to my desk, my mind spinning. If someone at the company had helped Carla rush that payout, then she hadn't acted alone. She'd had assistance, maybe even paid someone to clear the path. I opened the employee logs from that time period. It took a while, but eventually I found the name of the claims agent who processed the payout. Walter Dean. He'd retired 5 years ago. Still, the company records had his address listed for pension correspondence. I copied it into my notes. I didn't know if I'd ever contact him, but something told me I might have to. An unexpected discovery. That weekend I couldn't rest. Every time I tried to relax, my thoughts circled back to that file. I decided to visit the public records office downtown. It wasn't far, and I knew they kept archives of insurance claims and property deeds. The clerk at the front desk was an older woman with glasses and a patient smile. "Can I help you, sweetie?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "I'm looking for old insurance claim filings. Under the name Thomas Matthews." She typed for a moment, then frowned. "That's odd. There's a confidentiality flag on that one. You related?" "Yes," I said softly. "He was my father." Her eyes softened. "I'm sorry, dear. I can't give you full access, but I can show you the public side." She turned the screen slightly toward me. There it was, the official record of my father's claim, date filed, amount paid. Then, at the bottom, something strange, a supplemental beneficiary adjustment signed off months later. "Can I print this?" I asked carefully. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Technically, you're not supposed to. But sometimes, files like these get lost in the system." She slid the printout toward me quietly. I smiled gratefully. "Thank you." When I left, the cold air hit my face, sharp and bracing. I looked down at the paper in my hand, my father's name, my stolen future, and felt something stronger than anger. Purpose. A visit from the past. The following week, I finally gathered the courage to contact Walter Dean, the retired agent listed in the file. I wasn't sure he'd respond, but to my surprise, he called back the next morning. "Ms. Matthews, you said you had questions about a claim I handled." "Yes," I said, steadying my voice. "It's been a long time, but I believe there were errors in my father's policy payout. I just need to understand what happened." He sighed. "I remember that case. Your stepmother, right? She was persuasive. Came in with documents that looked legitimate. Said she was handling everything for you. We verified her ID and it checked out. But..." He paused. "But what?" I pressed. There was something off about the second signature. It didn't match the first. I mentioned it to management, but they told me to let it go, that everything was verified. "Who told you that?" I asked quietly. "A regional manager named Carl Benson. He retired soon after that." "Look, I didn't mean any harm, but if I'd known..." I cut him off gently. "You didn't know. None of us did." When the call ended, I sat staring at my phone. It all made sense now. Carla had someone inside. Someone who pushed the paperwork through before questions could be asked. And I finally had a name. The Quiet Investigation. For the next several weeks, I collected everything: timelines, statements, digital copies of altered forms. I organized them carefully, creating a detailed report. It wasn't about revenge anymore, not entirely. It was about truth. About clearing my father's name from the manipulation Carla had wrapped it in. I submitted the report anonymously through the company's internal ethics system. It triggered an automatic compliance review. For a few days, nothing happened. Then the whispers started. People were talking in the hallways about an old fraud claim being reopened. The atmosphere grew tense. A few senior staff looked uneasy. By the end of the month, corporate auditors arrived from the regional office. I kept my head down, pretending I didn't know anything. But every time I walked past the conference room and saw those folders spread across the table, my heart beat faster. They were finally looking at the truth. The email that changed everything. It was late on a Friday when I got the email. The subject line read, "Follow up, Historical Claim Inquiry." Clicked it open. "Ms. Matthews, following your recent internal report, we have reopened claim #TX0147, Thomas Matthews. Preliminary findings suggest unauthorized beneficiary alteration and falsified documentation. We appreciate your cooperation in maintaining confidentiality during this process. Further communication will follow through official channels. Compliance Department." I stared at the screen, unable to move. I wanted to cry, laugh, and scream all at once. 4 years I'd been dismissed, ignored, erased. And now, finally, someone believed me. But even as relief washed over me, a new emotion crept in: fear. Because this wasn't over. Once Carla found out the truth was surfacing, she wouldn't stay silent. The call came 3 days later. I was sitting at my desk when my phone rang. An unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello, Liza." The voice was calm but coldly familiar. "Carla." My throat tightened. "How did you get this number?" "Doesn't matter," she said sharply. "What are you doing? You think you can just dig up old things and ruin people's lives?" "You mean my father's life?" I said quietly. "The one you stole from?" She exhaled sharply, almost a scoff. "You don't understand the things I had to do. You were just a kid. You wouldn't have managed anything on your own." I laughed softly. "You're right. I was a kid. But I'm not anymore." There was a long pause. Then she said, "You'll regret this." "No," I said, my voice steady now. "You will." I hung up before she could say another word. And for the first time since the night my dad died, I felt free. That night I sat by my window, the same one I'd once looked through as a lost girl, wondering why no one cared. Now I wasn't wondering anymore. I knew exactly what had happened. The truth wasn't buried anymore. It was surfacing, one document, one signature, one brave moment at a time. And soon the world would know who Carla really was. When I walked out of that dusty storage room clutching those old insurance files, I wasn't the same woman anymore. Years of pain, loneliness, and confusion had hardened into something sharper. Clarity. The truth wasn't just a relief, it was fuel. They thought I was gone for good, that I'd spend the rest of my life scraping by, too scared or too kind to ever fight back. They were wrong. It started quietly. No angry confrontations. No shouting. I didn't want revenge that screamed. I wanted one that whispered, and left echoes they'd never forget. I first called the insurance company. My hands shook as I spelled out my father's name and the policy number I'd memorized from the papers I'd found. The woman on the other end went silent after a moment. Then, in a calm but cautious tone, she said, "Ma'am, that account was closed nearly 15 years ago. But there's a record of payout to a co-beneficiary, Helen Smith." Helen. My stepmother. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear the rest. The woman explained that the policy had been altered just weeks before my father's passing. The beneficiary line once had my name on it, Liza Parker, but it had been switched to Helen and her son, Jason. The payout was substantial, over $200,000. My stepmom and half-brother had stolen it all, down to the last cent my father meant for my future. I hung up the phone and just sat there frozen. I'd always known they lied, but seeing the proof? That was like finally finding the last puzzle piece of my own heartbreak. For a few weeks I didn't tell anyone. I just thought about all the birthdays they'd ignored, the college tuition I couldn't afford, The nights I ate instant noodles in my tiny apartment wondering why life felt so unfair. All along they were living comfortably off what was meant for me. I checked social media, something I hadn't done in years. There they were. Helen posting pictures from her lake house. Jason flashing a new car. Their smiles looked so smug, so satisfied, like life had rewarded them for cruelty. And that's when I decided. This wouldn't end with bitterness. It would end with truth. But to get there I needed to be smart. So I started small. I reached out to an old neighbor, Mrs. Dalton. She was kind, talkative, and had lived next to our old house for decades. I remembered her because she always saw everything. When I visited her that sunny Saturday morning, she looked at me with surprise and warmth. "Liza? My goodness, I haven't seen you since you were a teenager." We talked for hours. When I brought up Helen and Jason, her tone changed. "Sweetheart, I remember that time after your father passed. They were packing up so fast, barely a week later. I thought it was strange. And Helen mentioned something about a check coming through. Said it was a blessing." That word blessing felt like a knife. Mrs. Dalton didn't realize it, but she gave me exactly what I needed. A timeline. Proof that Helen and Jason had taken the money right after my father's death. I thanked her, pretending it was just for closure, but inside I was planning every step. Next, I contacted an attorney who handled inheritance fraud cases. His name was Mr. Cole, a sharp but calm man in his 50s who listened without interrupting. I showed him everything. The files, the insurance copy, and the evidence I'd gathered. He leaned back, took off his glasses and said, "Liza, what they did is not just immoral, it's illegal. If we can prove they forged that signature or manipulated the beneficiary change, they could be in serious trouble." He smiled slightly. "Are you ready for that?" I nodded. "I've been ready for years." We started digging. Mr. Cole got access to archived signatures, forms, and digital logs. The investigation took months, but the results were undeniable. My father's handwriting on the final change form didn't match any of his verified signatures. It had been forged. The date stamp? Just 4 days before his accident. Helen and Jason hadn't just stolen money. They'd committed fraud. When the lawsuit was filed, I didn't tell anyone. I wanted the surprise to land like thunder. The sheriff's department served Helen the papers right at her workplace, at the small-town grocery store she managed. Jason got his at home. Within hours, my phone blew up with calls from numbers I hadn't seen in years. The first voicemail was from Helen, her voice trembling but furious. "Liza, what do you think you're doing? You're ruining this family." Family. The word made me laugh through tears. Then came Jason. "You're out of your mind. Dad wanted Mom to have that money. You've got no proof." But I did. And soon so would the whole town. Weeks later we met in court. Helen sat at the defense table, her face pale, lips pressed tight. Jason looked restless, tapping his foot. I sat across from them, calm but burning inside. When the insurance representative testified, she confirmed every detail. The beneficiary change was unauthorized. The signature was forged. The payout had been made under false pretenses. Helen's lawyer tried to argue it was a clerical mix-up. But when the forensic expert displayed the side-by-side signatures, even the judge frowned. It was undeniable. The verdict came weeks later. Restitution and damages in my favor. Helen and Jason were ordered to repay what they took, with interest. It was over. But for me, revenge wasn't about the money anymore. It was about truth. And watching their faces when the judge read the decision, it was worth every lonely year I'd spent trying to survive. You'd think that would be enough. But fate had one more twist. A few months later, I got a call from Helen. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. "Liza," she said, her voice small and shaky. "We lost the house. Jason moved out. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I never thought it would come to this." I listened in silence. My chest felt heavy, not with pity but with finality. "I hope you find peace, Helen," I said softly. "Because I finally have." And that was it. I didn't gloat. I didn't scream. I just hung up, closed my eyes and let out the breath I'd been holding for years. The next morning, I walked to the small diner where I worked part-time. The same one that kept me going when I had nothing. My coworker, Jenny, smiled and poured me coffee. "Rough morning?" she asked. I smiled faintly. No. Just a long one that finally ended. She chuckled. That's a good thing then. As I looked out the diner window watching people move about their day, I realized something profound. Revenge didn't fix the past, but it freed me from it. For years I thought justice meant making them hurt the way I did. But standing there, breathing freely for the first time in forever, I understood something deeper. Justice is when you stop letting their betrayal define your future. Months later, I used the settlement money to start something new. A small foundation that helped women rebuild after financial betrayal. Those who lost everything to people they trusted. Every time I helped someone start fresh, I felt a little more healed. One afternoon while sorting paperwork, I found an old photo of my dad and me at a fair. We were smiling, holding cotton candy, the sun setting behind us. I whispered, I did it, Dad. I finally made it right. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere he heard me. Because for the first time in my life, the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt peaceful. And that's how I got my revenge, the kind they never saw coming. Not through anger or cruelty, but through truth, strength, and the quiet power of finally letting go. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't about taking back what was stolen. It's about rebuilding stronger than they ever thought you could.